as Hodge claims, then their weight would have to be between 503 and 880 pounds. Obviously, Hodge cooked the books. He inflated the dosage figures as well as the exposure times to the crippling stage of skeletal fluorosis. And unless you're willing to tell me you can envision those tall, chubby 880-pounders doing hard physical labor mining creolite in Denmark in the 1920s and 30s, then you can't tell me the 20 to 80 milligram figures are valid. And if they aren't valid, then the very foundation for our drinking water regulation is gone. The argument for safety, based on a wide margin between typical dietary fluoride levels and the doses known to produce serious arthritic symptoms in just a few years, is also gone. There is no margin of safety. Many years ago, I searched the literature for myself, pulling the bound volumes of the major medical, dental, public health, environmental, and industrial health journals from the shelves at the Science Library at Michigan State University. Many of them go back beyond 1930, but 1930 was the starting place, as I worked my way forward, feeding nickels into the copy machine until I had over 1,000 articles. Many times, one would lead to another, and another, and another. I read the changing opinions about fluoride as it worked its way from rat poison and toxic industrial waste to a valued nutrient. All this came about, incidentally, because I'd been interested in nutrition and pharmacology for several years and had managed to cure my own allergies and arthritis through changes in my diet. I had a copy of Goodman and Gilman's 1970 edition of the Pharmacological Basis of Therapeutics and looked up fluoride one day out of curiosity. Curiosity born of a statement made to me by Mrs. Martha Johnson, a little old lady in Lansing, Michigan, who knew she was right, but had great difficulty convincing others. She had a whole shopping bag full of papers, but I must admit I thought she was eccentric at best. Nonetheless, I looked in Goodman and Gilman and found a discussion of water fluoridation. They described the effects of 1 part per million on children's teeth as affecting 10 to 15% and limited to the earliest slight whitening effect, which can only be detected under strong light by the trained eye. The effect of 2 parts per million, however, could be disastrous and involve nearly all exposed children. I recognized this indicator of a drug effect rather than one of a harmless nutrient. Questions came to mind, such as, is fluoride absorbed from food? What is the effect of cooking food in fluoridated water? Is excess fluoride eliminated by the kidney? Are there any other recognized toxic effects? And if so, how much fluoride would it take to produce signs of chronic toxicity? How much fluoride could I find in my diet? I began writing letters to the health department in Michigan and received answers which mentioned specific documents to support them. I received several pamphlets, one of which told me my diet probably contained 2 to 5 milligrams of fluoride daily. I was told that fluoride is not absorbed from food and that healthy kidneys excrete any excess. I was assured that hundreds of safety studies had proven that my concerns were without foundation. According to the experts in Michigan, there was a disease called skeletal fluorosis which occurred in India, where the water supplies contained from 11 to 100 parts per million fluoride, but no cases had ever been reported here in the United States. I might have been reassured, except that each claim was accompanied by a reference to the scientific literature, which I had no trouble finding at Michigan State University. In every case, the journal article cited contained far different information. The journal regarding the water supply in India said the highest level reported was 16 parts per million, not 11 to 100. I found several case reports, one involving a man who lived in an area having only 1.2 parts per million fluoride in the water. And when I mentioned this example published in Radiology in 1943, the health department replied that the journal article has shown 1.2 parts per million in the May issue, but was corrected to 12 parts per million in June. When I took the radiology article of May and the erratum note of June to show the expert he had it backwards, he refused to believe his own eyes. He showed me his Fluoride Bible, a collection of abstracts from the Kettering Laboratory at the University of Cincinnati, published in 1963. Sometime later, after I had obtained a copy of his book called The Role of Fluoride in Public Health, and copied the original articles represented by the abstracts, I went back to the health department with several dozen examples showing that their statements to me, although in agreement with the Kettering abstracts, were not in agreement with the journal articles available in the library. He looked at a few, saw the movement of decimals and changes in study methods, and said to me, quote, "Look, lady, if the abstracts don't agree with the originals, there must be something wrong with the originals," unquote. Publication of his Bible, the Book of Abstracts, was funded by the National Institute of Dental Research. The Kettering Lab produced the abstracts at the request of several sponsors, whose concern was the effect of industrial exposure to fluoride. They include the Aluminum Company of America, Alcoa, Aluminum Company of Canada, American Petroleum Institute, Columbia Geneva Steel Company, DuPont, Harshaw Chemicals, Kaiser Aluminum, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, Pennsylvania Salt Manufacturing Company, Reynolds Metals Company, Tennessee Valley Authority, and the Universal Oil Products Company. Kettering's advisory editorial board for the 1963 abstracts included Edward Largent, industrial hygienist for Reynolds Metals Company, McClure, Zipkin, and Russell of the National Institute of Dental Research, Schlesinger, New York State Health Department, and Smith, who was Hodge's co-author. Fluoridation as a Public Health Measure, 1954, was also funded by industry. Fluorine and Dental Health, 1942 and 1959, and Dental Caries and Fluorine, 1946. All these books cite the same authors: Hodge, Smith, Cox, Largent, Schlesinger, McClure, and Dean. Kettering Lab abstracts and the reviews they have spawned, not the research papers published in the various medical, dental, industrial, and public health journals, became the accepted source of information on fluoride toxicity. As a result, all of the groups who prepared government-sponsored documents have perpetuated misinformation. In addition, Kettering's contract stipulated that the corporation could withhold publication of results unfavorable to its interests. Kettering Lab authors have also published information in the scientific journals which delayed recognition of the more subtle effects of childhood lead poisoning, using language and arguments similar to those used to claim safety with fluoride. You can find one example in the journal Oil Facts for July-August 1962. It was this material which convinced the governor's office in Michigan to order a review to determine the current amount of fluoride in typical diets. The panel chairman, William Taylor, began his task of whitewash with a catch-22. All material to be considered by the panel must pass through his hands first. I was not allowed to submit entire articles photocopied at Michigan State University Library because they were too bulky. I was not allowed to submit portions, excerpts, or summaries because they were not complete and would be taken out of context. I was not allowed to speak with either the chairman or any panel member or communicate my concerns in any way, except that they were aware I had claimed there had been a change reported in dietary levels of fluoride from 0.2 to 0.3 milligrams a day in non-fluoridated areas in the early 1940s to as much as 3.4 milligrams a day from food alone in 1974, even in areas having only about half the optimum level of fluoride in the water supply. The panel concluded in favor of fluoridation that the reports were inconsequential because methods had improved over the years in analysis of samples, making the old figures suspect. I then went to the Toxic Substance Control Commission, explaining that in the 1940s the reports included figures with 3 or 4 decimals, such as 1.103, and that although technology had improved to the point which measures in several more decimals, the difference between 1.103 and 1.103675 was meaningless. The increase in dosage was on the order of 1 to 5, whole numbers, not fractions. Their chief toxicologist, Dr. Norman Zimmerman, agreed with me and produced a report in May of 1981 called The Need for the Determination of the Extent of Total Fluoride Exposure in Community Assessment of the Value of Water Fluoridation. He suggested communities which are presently fluoridating should determine the resultant total daily dose. and communities considering fluoridation first do the same to avoid the possibility of overdose. He noted that according to the currently available literature, the total could be as much as 5.7 times the fluoride in the water. The people of Michigan can now vote to refuse water fluoridation. Michigan was the first state to repeal its mandatory fluoridation law. But they are still under the influence of the same political pressure and misguided scientific opinions which govern many city council actions. Very few have access to the truth or even think about it. The argument most often heard in favor of fluoridation is that the benefits outweigh any possible risks. We know that dental health statistics do not support that view. They show virtually no benefit from fluoridation today. We are asked to disregard the many recent studies showing an increase in both osteoporosis and bone cancer in the fluoridated area. We are told, like small children, that everything can harm us when we get too much, whether it's sunshine, vitamins, lead, or fluoride. Everything can be harmful, they say, while you could drown in your own bathtub. We are educated to believe that by controlling the amount of fluoride in water, we are controlling the amount in our diet. As though, if you applied the same argument to calories, a person could control his weight by simply switching to diet soda. Ignoring the steak and french fries, the butter and sour cream, and rich desserts, any thinking person can recognize the absurdity if he would just think. Those of us who have investigated the original studies of Cox, McClure, and Dean know full well that fluoridation came about through less than scientific means. Cox's study on rats shows the rats that got more fluoride had more cavities. Dean ignored most of the available data, picking only the towns which would support his purpose. McClure not only pooled his urine samples in batches of 30, but also controlled the samples to assure his results. The Newburgh-Kingston pediatric study excluded all children with health problems and ignored a finding of bone changes which suggested osteogenic sarcoma. In Bartlett, Texas, the death rate was more than double that in neighboring Cameron. But researchers confined themselves to an examination of x-rays, and even then they had no knowledge of the actual use by residents of the local water supply. X-rays of children's wrists and hands, height and weight charts have been offered as proof of safety, as well as curiously adjusted mortality statistics. If you search the literature, volume by volume, in all the major public health, medical, dental, environmental, and industrial health journals as far back as 1930, as I did years ago, you will not be able to locate even one scientific study of people exposed to as much as 1 milligram of fluoride daily, which would have been capable of identifying those who displayed or complained of the symptoms we now know can be caused by excess fluoride. The evidence for safety depends on a belief that mortality statistics are an adequate early warning sign. If you examine the study published in the New England Journal of Medicine in May 1978, you will see that the death rates for all causes of death but accident were higher in the fluoridated cities. The author, in order to support his own predetermined conclusions, was forced to adjust his statistics as follows. In one group, the non-fluoridated, the average length of formal education was 12 years. In the other, the fluoridated, where there were more deaths per capita from all forms of chronic disease, the average length of formal education was only 11.5 years. The rationale used to explain away the fluoride-related death was that, contrary to popular belief, one's chances of getting or dying from cancer depend not so much on dietary habits or lifestyle, not on working with cancer-producing chemicals, not on breathing the toxic fumes associated with polluted air, but on differences which we might best describe as graduating from high school. It seems absurd, but the very best arguments against water fluoridation have been made by those who promote it. The question that needed an answer, at least for me, was why? How could this happen? I said earlier that my view of this issue changed when I finally found Hodges' source material for the 20 to 80 milligram figures. I discovered the circumstances and put myself in his place. Those of you who've studied this issue are aware that scientists didn't discover the relationship between fluoride and mottled enamel until 1931. Shortly thereafter, dozens of articles appeared in the professional literature describing the various degrees of damage to the appearance and durability of Fluoro's teeth. Methods of removing brown stain were presented. Reports appeared